Please welcome Mr. Amir Ansari. Thank you. Thanks for being flexible.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Internet of Things, of course, and how privacy applies to it. So at first, I want to kind of go through the definition of what is the Internet of Things. And frankly, there are numerous. So you can see we have very clear industry consensus of what this definition really is. And unfortunately, they're not all completely aligned. But, you know, we can kind of look back a little bit to see how it got evolved and how people are looking at it. If you look at essentially Internet 1.0, Web 1.0, in the early 90s, everything was about just getting connectivity to the single device and getting information just to one device for service interaction. Then in the early 2000s through 2010, it was mostly about social interaction, Internet of People, getting engines to bring you information from different services, data mining, what's happening mostly today, what everybody's familiar with. Then, you know, now we're getting into the Internet of Things, the age of devices talking to devices, and getting dynamic location systems, communicating big data processing for these types of devices. That's where essentially the Internet of Things seems to want to go. At least that's where people are saying it is. But in reality, it's not about devices talking to devices. It's about the services that people can benefit from by having these devices communicate to each other. There's a lot of different industries that kind of look at this. And we're looking at about 50 billion connected devices in the next few years coming online. But in reality, when you look at the relevance of this to the average person, it's not about necessarily getting advantage of how different industries are becoming more efficient or cost-effective by having these machine-to-machine communications happen. It's mostly about how it impacts individuals. The connected home, the connected individual, and those devices that we've been hearing about earlier today. So in that context, we look at this, there's really not one Internet of Things. There's a variety of different versions of it. It's not one interface, certainly not one protocol. And especially when you look at the connected home, it is a hodgepodge of different interfaces, different protocols, very little standards. Even the standards that are there are not completely followed through. And the services are, again, very wide, very diverse. You have everything from healthcare to security to data interactions. And you know, where's all this information being stored? Some of it is in this cloud, different clouds, your devices, your phones. It's not exactly centralized and certainly not controlled by the end user. So these are some of the challenges facing the Internet of Things and how things kind of want to work right now. So what exactly is, again, the Internet of Things? Well, very basic definition. I guess the easiest way to look at it is lots of networks of things talking to lots of other networks of things in order to do something. So you get data from a device, you apply some logic to it in order to take an action. At root analysis, that's what it is. And when we look at the connected home, you have all these different sensors, your garage door, your motion sensors, your water usage, gas usage, lights, dimmers, everything. All of these things kind of combine together from a home automation perspective, energy management, healthcare, whether you're opening the medicine cabinet door, how many times at the right time, when you wake up, when you go to the refrigerator, how many times you went to the refrigerator. All of these things can be tracked. A huge amount of data is being collected on a daily basis. So when you look at it from a connected home perspective, the definition changes a little bit. It's now your network of things talking to lots of other networks of things in order to do something. And that's where the privacy issues, again, kind of come into play. You don't really care that this airplane is being managed more efficiently. It's not relevant to you. But you do care if your Fitbit is being used to track what time you go to bed. You're using it for your sleep tracking, for example, as we heard earlier. But what if somebody else is looking at that data in a different way? Between 11 p.m. and midnight, maybe you have extra activity going on using your Fitbit is being detected, and somebody understands that that's not necessarily sleeping. So it becomes very sensitive, very personal data at that point. But the information continues to flow out of that sensor. And how it's interpreted, who interprets it, is really not in your control. So now, when people begin to think about that, you see a little bit of a discourse, a little bit of concern. So a very recent survey of people about the connected home and Internet of Things is nearly 70% across the board get very angry and emotionally upset if some of their data is being used without their consent in a way that they didn't know about. And they get pissed off to the point that they might actually take action or change their subscription or discontinue the service. Or if the device is being mined by a third party that they didn't know about and they didn't get permission to. So a variety of these factors come in, and people obviously don't like it. And now, what is the consequence of these things, as you heard earlier? Well, what happens is, people get concerned with, who's in charge of that data, who owns that data, and what this triggers is governments getting nervous. So we saw a couple of resolutions, examples of that, and I'll go through a few here as well. In 1995, the European Commission passed a directive, which we heard about earlier, and this directive is at the root of a lot of the other countries kind of thinking about privacy as well. But it's really putting a pretty stiff penalty for companies that may not comply once it gets fully ratified with the laws that they're asking to get ratified. And up to 2% of the annual revenue of that company could be imposed as fines. Google's $50 billion revenue, 2% is not a small amount. So this is, they're getting pretty serious about this. And it's not just the European Union. Countries that want to participate and trade with the European Union are forced to kind of follow suit. So some countries where democracy actually is not, what we heard earlier, in a free and open democratic nation, some of these countries are not free and open, but yet they still have privacy laws. And in fact, in some of those countries, privacy is treasured much, much, much more closely than it is here because, even if the government knows something about you, you could get in trouble. So people just don't like to disclose their information. And they want to be in control, as we heard. It's very important. So just again, a few days ago, as we heard last week in a conference, they had these privacy experts got together and made some declarations. But the interesting thing that came out of that, the chairman of the commission the head of the Data Protection Authority of France essentially made this statement that the Internet of Things should stay under the control of the user. Now, that is very much where we think things need to be. The user should be in control of all of your data. It's my data. I don't want anybody else to get to it. But I still want to be able to do all the services that I want. And if I want to not pay for it and want to consume some ads, I should, but you still shouldn't take my data. So it becomes kind of a have my cake and eat it too, and that's where it's getting into. Now, the challenge here is, if you don't do it, it looks like it's going to become regulatory imposed for us to do it. And, the very good advice just a couple of days ago that the former US Deputy CTO made this statement that, it's the best thing for us to avoid government regulatory intervention is to kind of be more disciplined, as we had we just heard, and take the initiative and advocate for privacy and make it a reality. So how do we do it? So let me tell you about Prodea and how we've kind of achieved this. Prodea my company, we've had a very long startup cycle. We started the research and development of our product and services in 2003. And for 2 years, all we did was just research and talk to different people, different industry experts to figure out what can we do in terms of delivering services, value-added propositions to consumers, and allow that rapid uptake of new services and new functionality from health management to home automation to even video on demand and voice over IP communications. How can we enable these things and make it cost effective, make it simple, make it easy, make it attractive, get advertisers to play, and still maintain the privacy of individuals? So we started on this in 2003. And it's not an easy road to take because everybody doesn't want to go that way. It's very easy for Fitbit and companies like that to take that data and try and sell that data for additional revenue. And it's very, very tempting. The greed factor is high, investor pressure is very high, and that's something that, it's one thing to get the smart sensor to work right. That's good for everybody, but people always want to make more money. And that usage data is extremely valuable. So the approach that we took is also an approach that Cisco is also advocating, frankly, just lately. Cisco just gave up. Instead of calling Internet of Things, they call it Internet of Everything. So it's actually more accurate. Because again, it's not about the things, it's about every service. Video on demand, you may not think that that's an Internet of Things service, but it really is. Voice over IP is yet another type of service. So it's not about things, it's about services and about the information that these services generate. So our approach has been to never, ever take the data away from the user. It always stays with the user. It stays on your phone, it stays inside your home. Those are the two things that most laws protect as your private property. And even governments can't access them without proper due process in most countries. So our approach has always been to never take the data. In fact, technically speaking, it's very difficult to take all this data. Huge amounts of data is being processed. Just imagine every time motion sensor data, I've got 7 motion sensors in my house. All of that data is being pushed to a cloud. I have to interpret as a cloud, figure out what's good, what's bad in order to notify some other sensor. Now, if I had 50, 60 of these devices, hundreds of these devices in my environment, this poor cloud has to transfer, the network has to transfer this data. Some engine has to make sense of it and then be able to, in near real time, provide feedback. 1 or 2 users, 1 million users is not a problem. 10 million users, 50 billion devices, that's a lot of traffic. So let's not do that. Let's keep the data at the source and put the logic where the data is. And that's really our core principle is do that, but also do it where the user has privacy control. And that is within their premise, on their device, inside their home, is legally protected, is safer, and the fact that it's distributed makes it inherently more secure. So doing that is a very important piece of it. Then from a cloud perspective, of course, you have to have some command and control of this. So the cloud becomes fairly thin. All it's doing is making sure that the edge nodes, the mobile phone logic application inside the phone or inside your set-top box or router, whatever it may be inside the home that's actually aggregating all this information, is being managed and controlled by cloud nodes, authorizing services, deploying information, and pulling summary information back. Summary information, as we just heard, is this anonymized data that, if you follow proper practices, is actually very inert. It comes in and it gives a summarized information, not just one user, but a collection of users. So you can collect the trends and understand what's happening, what's not happening. And also it's good for, it's really all the advertisers really want. Advertisers don't really care that Amir, likes Sarah McLachlan. They just want to know if I am a Democrat or a Republican so they can sell me the right ad. Now, I'm giving them that information, so they're using that data to get to that answer. But if I were just to tell them, hey, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, give me the right ad, they'll be just as happy. So that analysis, that logic can be done locally. The data doesn't have to leave the home. The central system, all it's doing is collecting anonymized inert data, which can be manipulated in different ways as a group. And also it allows private access to third-party services. So yeah, I want to be able to pull videos, and I want to be able to do everything directly to the service that I like. I don't want to go through a proxy. So that should always be open. But for me to give access to anybody, any cloud, to my other devices is not something that I want. I want somebody that actually enforces my privacy security for me. Like, for example, if you go buy a camera, a D-Link camera, an internet camera. Well, this camera comes with its own little cloud service. Whether you want it or not, that's what it comes with. So as part of our offering, what we would do is, if you're subscribing to the service, privacy is a service. We actually sell that as a value-added service. So when this camera gets connected to your home network, it cannot get to the D-Link cloud, which means that it can't get hacked, it can't get compromised, because that information never makes it to where it was intended. We actually block it, change it, and it only talks within the home. But yet we allow all your mobile devices, your TVs, your web interfaces, wherever you may be, to access your home service and access your clouds and your information, because it's you, you've identified yourself. It doesn't need to go to a different cloud for you to understand this. Network connections are becoming ubiquitous. We have the DSL standards that are going to give us gigabit connection even. So it's not so hard to essentially make the home the hub of all your information, and for safety, security, and legal protection. So we have that. The cloud portion kind of does the signaling or the traffic policing of what should go where. And then from a management perspective, we allow customers, operators to provision users and get billing data so you can be charged properly. So that's essentially our approach. It's not too different from what Cisco would call their fog computing architecture. We kind of came up with it in 2003. We've got about 20 patents around it. But it's a nice architecture, and it does make sense, and it's completely open. No strange, crazy protocols that anybody needs to implement. The standard. In fact, the devices that you would get don't have to change behavior. They stick to what they do. The challenge here, though, is from a consumer perspective, is when you go into solutions like third-party applications that you buy on your own, like a Fitbit or things of that nature, where actually the device is not talking to a home network, but in reality, it only talks to a cloud service. And you got to pull that information to aggregate, even in our solution, inside your home from the cloud service. This becomes a little bit more complicated, and I think that's where Anne's comments become very, very handy, is companies like that are trying to sell additional identifiable application services. If they were to comply with some kind of a privacy policy to enforce their control or limit their control as to what they can do with your data and put the user back in charge, that would be ideal. But the greed factor is very high. Or the need to sell and use that data is very high. And that's really where we have a bit of a challenge in either consumer education or a vendor participation in the security spectrum. Also, one other factor with our company, just to kind of tie the Internet of Things to the space, as you heard, my family and I are kind of involved with the whole space industry. You may not think there's anything relevant between the two, but when we launched our company officially, we actually launched it on the exact day and time that my sister-in-law actually flew to the International Space Station on the Soyuz rocket in 2006. And we launched the company at the same time. And while she was up there, NASA gave us an IP connection. So we had our prototype solution kind of working from the International Space Station. So I think I can probably the only one here in this industry that can claim, when we say remote access to your home and Internet of everything, everything on planet and off planet, we've been there. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
Any questions?
Okay.
None of the questions? Nothing was written down? Anyone?
Hi, my name's Jeff. So for the average user who has a home, who can't set up their own D-Link camera, who can't do anything whatsoever, how do you solve the problem of ensuring that the data that they want to share is known to their home and that it's blocked? The average person can't do that themselves.
You're absolutely right. Our model actually works through a operator model. So our customers aren't necessarily the end user, it's a service provider, like for example, a telephone provider, internet provider, or a retail outfit for that matter. And we have all of these as our customers. So what they would do is they would sell this to you as a service. And you know, for me, there's a big difference between an application and a service, and that's the management that goes along with it. There are very few people that are willing to go into their home and take out their thermostats on their own and change out the light switches. It's a fairly complicated task. In fact, anything that requires a screwdriver is not do it yourself. And a lot of the home automation stuff obviously is screwdriver driven. So in this context, what typically our model would work is that the operator would essentially provide the service, you subscribe to the service, and you get a managed service. So you get the system, and the user does nothing. In fact, the setup procedure for your example is they take the camera, they push the button on the camera, the wireless protected, and you plug in the power, and you push the button, that's it. And then the second thing that you do from your app on your TV, which is, you don't even have to load, it's already there, and your phone, and your web, everything is right there and there. You can see all your cameras, the authorization, security, all that is part of the point of sale that you do right when you purchase a system. So it has to be that simple. Most users are not going to go through the trouble of figuring out how to set stuff up. All right? Thank you very much.